There's this. And go to the brain. And I am done. Just in time for Endwalker. Oh, this is gonna be a nightmare. Oh shit, I have a YouTube channel. Hey, remember that video I made? The one telling you that you needed to play CrossCode and giving you a jillion reasons why? Primarily because it's a damn fine exemplar of German anime, but otherwise being an absolute classic of an experience? Do it! Now! Worm, what did I say? What did I say? What did I tell you, Evan? This video assumes you've played through both the base game and the DLC through to completion. I'm going to spoil everything possible about this game. I will be discussing the final acts of both the base game and the DLC. I'll be discussing every highlight prior to and in between, and every element that goes into making them what they are or why they fall a bit flat. In other words, play CrossCode, you maggot! I'm gonna spoil everything! And you're not gonna get a word of what I'm talking about because you're not gonna have any context. You're not gonna enjoy this because I'm gonna be very technical and honestly, comparatively dry. I don't care if you think you don't care, I care! Stop watching and don't come back until you're done the game! If any of you have played it to credits, please disregard the previous rant. You're not maggots, you're wonderful sexy maggots who indulge me in my nonsense and I couldn't be more grateful. Same goes if you don't plan on playing the game, but maybe I can convince you. I'm going to be tackling subjects in a mostly random order. I'm starting at the very end of the base game, and I'll be zipping back and forth between chapters like a puppy composed primarily of crack cocaine. And I will not be dry in my discussion of this. That was to drive away the uncultured. I am become moist. Let's open strong. The Blue Avatar. Or rather, Gotham. Gotham? Gotham. I apologize if I pronounce anything wrong. It's an Indian name and there's some Hindu mythological reference, but I'm really bad at understanding Indian accents and inflections, so yikes, just call me out in the comments. I probably deserve it. We are starting with the final boss. I am not here to play games. Cards on the table. I don't like how they handled him for a multitude of reasons. His appearances as the Blue Avatar are simple and charming, recurring antagonist stuff. Their charm lies in
attack its weak point for massive damage,
and pulling that out in the first hour of the game. For this kind of trickster god pseudo-antagonist, we see him in a surprising number of capacities. He's much more serious in the Vermilion Wastes and seems to genuinely enjoy creating challenges for the players, or Lee specifically. But when you hit the Sapphire Ridge exposition dump and you learn about the man behind the screen, Lee has no stake in the drama around Gotham, and thus neither does the player. Sergei and Satoshi aren't really equipped as characters to act on it and create drama. Sergei is a man in the chair only seen by hologram. Satoshi is an evotar restricted to his hidey hole. So as central as that conflict is, Lee and Gotham don't have a connection. And when he takes specific actions, while I'm sure that as a story about game designers written by game designers, it was incredibly cathartic to write, it just doesn't have any reason to hit Lee. There's no impact on our window to the world. It's like somebody throws a rock through your neighbor's window instead of yours. If Shizuka were to break in and have some dealings, it could really help drive it home. They already have some pretty advanced AI for Spheromancers in Apollo. He's a usable ally. Breaking into Vermilion Wastes complexes is in character for her. They even have a sprite sheet from the cold open to put over that AI. But it just doesn't happen. For the broader finale and the final dungeon, he's completely off his rocker and dissociating in the Avatar, which we don't have a frame of reference to judge that for ourselves, but he does seem just a bit hammier than prior appearances. It's very slight, the man's already the whole butchery, and everyone's already being dramatic because it's the freaking climax. It's not weird or unsettling because it's just expected for villains to be monologue prone towards the finale. But then he starts going on about the ultimate experience, and that is where it goes to shit. I mean, the resulting dungeon is nice. It's a good challenge, the puzzles are quick and breezy with a unique mechanic, but A, he's interrupting the actual plot with this, and B, it's not that ultimate. Other games have topped it. This game has topped it. So for Gotham's self-composed eulogy, it's kind of sad in its self-aggrandizement in a way that doesn't hit me as intentional, making it into this self-evident art of a madman where the correct solution is so hard to parse or impossible. like some corrupted level where the only way through is to sequence break or exploit it. It could pay off the similar experience of backtracking through puzzles in the breakout sequence, and it would give more credence to him kinda losing it. I can only speak for myself, but my ultimate experience has a little less self-aggrandizement. The writers are pretty self-aware about it. Sergei's reaction to the final bouncing puzzle is very appropriate, and it's a great puzzle. I'd call it the best of its kind in the game. It's intuitive and seriously hard. But mother of God, it is a pace killer. At the end of the dungeon, you reach his boss fight, and his first phase is great. It's a remix and extension of his prior battle. He's expanded to use more elements, the way you play with his vulnerabilities is nice and tricky, and it communicates his bear shenanigans very elegantly. Where the ultimate experience really gets shot down is his boss fight's last-ish phase, the Creator. This form is modeled after the Hindu god of beginnings and, that's a big list, Ganesha. The fight itself is alright. Big AoEs, hard hits, the patterns are a bit less than any other boss, but then he starts multiplying his HP. Ugh. Quite the decision to make for a balanced experience. What are you, a Kaizo fanatic on Mario Maker, an 8-year-old putting up his everything-proof shield, or is it only the ultimate experience if the player is bored to tears by a bullet sponge? This was a style choice on behalf of Radical Fish, and I'll admit, it's absolutely great to hit the Elephant Man for 56 septillion damage, and if this number surprises you, I told you to get out. As shallowly fun as it is, it sabotages his themes and personal values, and doesn't even get the full impact for it. I'll go into what makes the attack multiplication work in other scenes later, but in this one, Gotham is an intelligent person who apparently wants to win or at least give a fair challenge, but he keeps giving you the balls to pop for attack boosts, and they don't really have any other purpose. You think he'd catch on, but he doesn't. And if he is only doing it to create the ultimate experience, then it's artificial and patronizing. I guess Creator could just be a custom-coded boss that he swaps out for his avatar instead of controlling it directly. That would excuse the idiocy, but it looks like he transforms into it, and the game is well appraised of RPG tropes to the point of a full deconstruction of the heroic mime. So they definitely know what the player's first instinct is upon seeing a dude with a god complex vanish in a flash of light to be replaced by a knockoff of a prominent deity. The assumption is that he turned himself into the thing. The nitty-gritty of the boss fight just feels off. The following scenes are very well done in a vacuum. It's surprisingly harrowing and suspenseful to see his shaking eyes come out to congratulate you as the instant matter cracks beneath him. But this isn't in a vacuum, it's coming right off the heels of And while off-screen interrogation is pretty dark, this is just a bridge too far for the established tone. They don't complement each other well, and again, Lee doesn't have much stake in this. We don't see enough of Gotham vanilla for this to hit. It could have been good, okay? Maybe if he pulled a reverse Truman Show and walked out of a door in the sky immediately after the fight, more somber music, giving the boss some tantrumy animations or reminders of dissociation through dialogue before the coup de grace, that would be some really good shit. As it stands, it raises the stakes and adds to Sidwell's crimes, which wasn't strictly necessary, and it creates a very interesting tone for your confrontation with him, so it gets credit there, but it's hard to see the interplay between a man and his persona if the man has 20 lines and the persona has 500. The raid is a fairly innocuous moment, all things considered. It could have been anything that got interrupted to bring Lee into the wasteland. But the details and commitment to a realistic MMO atmosphere make it something really special. The characters plan carefully, get everyone to set aside time, the main tank discusses mechanics before entering, assigning party roles. Even when it's just set dressing, this is so charming. You can't change what role you do, you'll always be column tackler, but giving everyone a defined role and being treated as an equal to the rest of your team by an authority figure? I don't know why, but that's such a nice, grounded experience that I can't not buy into the dynamic. A lot of people have to take stuff from bosses, so it's nice to have one that's actually good. Even the party that you can't see with Lucas, Lynn, and Buggy, they still come off as people on the other side. When Buggy screws up and the rest of the party needs to adapt and probably suffer a bit if you were particularly quick on the trigger, it serves as characterization, it's a fun addition to the atmosphere, and it separates the challenges after you understand the gimmick, and it fakes you out. All of this comes out of a few events on timers. Excellent use of the little dialogue corner. Genuinely one of the most effective pieces of this game's storytelling. There are so many great moments with this stupid thing, and I wish I could go over all of them, but we'd be here for hours. AI rights. Oh boy. Lee is an AI clone of a person. More conventional stories would discuss the definition of personhood. Flat out lesser stories would play robot racism for drama.
Oh my god.
Fuck you!
But the best part about CrossCode's take? There's no debate. I mean, Shizuka is a bit of a bitch, but as far as the narrative thinks, Lee is a person. Evotars are people. Nobody raises an alternate view because it's obvious. When your guild learns your secret and actually has it explained, there's no disbelief, no questions asked, just immediate support. Up Is Not Jump crystallized my stance on the topic in one of his 5 trillion Fallout 4 videos. Sentient machines are not property, no one thinks otherwise. While the absolute language of no one is probably untrue, the people who would even debate the question evidently have a dangerously low empathy score and probably shouldn't be allowed to vote. The only argument is if the robot is truly sentient, which, sure, I dare you to go in on that argument. I'm sure we, the age of TikTok addicts and Jake Paul, are equipped to lay a millennia-old philosophical quandary to rest. But Up Is Not Jump's statement is especially true with AIs as sophisticated as Lee. Hell, even on the more rudimentary ones like the Animatrix or Star Trek, I'm not willing to debate that. The only reason that Evotars aren't public knowledge is because of some anti-bot clause in Crossworld's terms of service. And when you raise the concept to a stakeholder in a combination Turing test and reverse Turing test, there's still no discussion of personhood or deserving existence. I really love this scene. It's accurate to problems with modern AI. Even though this kind of far future setting really shouldn't have the same AI problems that we do now, it's still amazing. It elaborates on some previous elements that went undiscussed, and it's a well laid out if rudimentary dialogue puzzle. But it's framed so well that I can't help but love it. Notably, Sidwell does not dismiss the personhood of Evotars. His justification for torturing them for information isn't, they're not people so it's fine. His stance is, there's literally no way to trace this back to me so long as we murder them, let's do it. Humanity isn't a part of his thought process on any front. It doesn't speak well to his treatment of physical people, so 3 points to Slytherin for civil rights, minus 7 trillion.
For murder.
Nice work, you limp pickle. It is so refreshing to have some AI characters that don't need to justify their personhood. As great as Data's trial is, it's kinda tough to see autistic coded characters as needing to prove themselves deserving of human respect. Because yes, for those who don't know, that is a discourse with human autistics, it's called othering. AI characters like that were the most positive representation for a lot of people, myself included. To be clear, Evotars are not coded that way, or in any particular way that I read. It's just their connection to the issue that's so prevalent in their little archetype. SJW ramblings aside, CrossCode doesn't bother with the obvious quote-unquote moral dilemma. Rather than reinvent the wheel, they go for a joyride. There's not enough stories that are so honest about that. The moral of the story isn't a sword of Damocles hanging over it. They know what you came for, they know what you've seen 1,000 times, so they won't waste your time with it. And I love feeling that respect for my time. Lee's muteness. I know I just said that Evotars aren't autistic coded, but muteness is not synonymous with autism, and it's only present in Lee. Lee cannot speak. She does acquire a limited vocabulary as the story goes on. Basic stuff. Hi, Lee, bye, sorry, meet, wait, who, what, when, where, why. And while that is more than some people have, the struggles it brings her are realistic. None of that fade out over player expositing, or imply speech through response and rhetorical questions like a monosyllabic anime primate. This is a challenge that the writers gave themselves, and it's a massive success. I think Sergey gets his own minute in the spotlight. He designates code words for given situations, offers multiple choice questions, patiently works through possibilities of yes-no questions, learns her patterns of broad contextual use and limited vocabulary for near total understanding. Worth noting is that while they do play it for comedy pretty often, it's never at Lee's expense. It's not mean-spirited. Half the time the joke is that NPC dialogue will respond to literally anything, or other people getting egg on their face for asking a question she can't answer. And a lot of this is down to the excellent body and facial language in her portraits. She gets so many jokes across with just her face and a few ellipses. She uses what for deadpan reactions pretty often, but I barely notice because she communicates the sentiment easily enough without it. In restricting the writers to so few, non-specific words, the player is forced to do a lot of the same interpretations as the cast, so paying attention to the context and her facial expressions is all the more important. Thus, for a character who can't speak, it's remarkably easy to get into her head, and the somewhat lacking information builds a picture very slowly, letting her surprise you with her reactions to novel situations. None of her snarking would hit half as hard without the effort she needs to go through to do it. Even with her limited vocabulary, she's one of the most expressive and assertive protagonists I've seen in a while. And that is before she gets an actual AAC in the new home ending. That's amazing. This is a real thing that people use. Yeah, this portrayal is holographic hard-light sci-fi, but shut up, look at the stock footage. The commitment to a sympathetic, realistic portrayal of this type of disorder is nothing short of fantastic. From the good ways people can still engage, their learning processes and slip-ups, to the struggles and difficulties it brings about. It's not my place to say, but from all of this, I think that it is unflinching, raw, and brilliantly executed mute representation. Gay, 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 gay! Apollo is probably my favorite character. Some people think he's annoying. My question is, why only some? He objectively is. When the rest of the group is so willing to take the piss out of the game in a more self-aware fashion, someone so lacking or at least uncaring about that self-awareness is such a great energy for this cast. He violates the sanctity of the First Scholar's chill vibes and serves as the source of conflict for the light-hearted side of the plot. You know, the dumb adventure story with the live riff track. And making him such a genuine try-hard challenge is the cherry on top. It's a flat-out rivalry for the characters and the player. As fun and likable as he is, being a smug, socially inept class elitist makes bashing his face scene viciously satisfying. Jern's deadpan reactions and confiding in Lee about the drama is an excellent comedic choice. The quiet, collected hunk makes for quite the foil to the lunatic role player, and their relationship is very subtly handled, like an old married couple. They live together, they squabble about responsibilities, they went on vacation together. You do not get more blatant than after that last duel. Real life. The themes around the real world and the ways that MMOs serve as an escape are crystallized in two scenes. One where Emily is ranting about her schoolwork in the Maroon Desert, and another brief moment with Lucas's room. They're both very simple, but Emily's scene reflects the way that people actually engage with this genre. It's a great emotional connection moment, it's background noise when not much would be going on otherwise. But where these scenes really become important is how they give context to my next point. Being an Evotar. Minor content warning, I get kind of existential here. I don't touch on anything that I think could be triggering, but if you have concerns about addressing potentially grim, existential, and diet cruelty squad subject matter, or if you're just not in the mood for melancholy, you can skip this chapter, I don't blame you. I mean, I am proud of it, so I wish you'd stick around. I am really happy that they addressed this in the DLC. Lee, Luke, Toby, all the other Evotars, they are only alive because Instatainment stands to profit off of them. While the discussion of AI personhood is a given, the life they'll live is a lot more complicated. Luke angsts up a storm about it, and quite justifiably. From his perspective, being trapped in a video game is less Sword Art Online, or Dante's Inferno, a game you once enjoyed but have long since exhausted, watching everyone else enjoy it in a way you have no reason to. It sounds kind of benign until you consider that you're basically immortal and the game is your life. And Toby's got it worse. He has all the memories of spying on his friends on top of being a horrendous criminal, all of that before the more intimate Hideo Kojima revelations. Satoshi's got it pretty rough too. Good luck changing your career or going on strike when your employer could literally pull the plug whenever. All Evotars are locked away from a world they remember clearly and can still affect them. They're restricted to this one game, its expansions, and anything else Instatainment makes. And that's before any hardware or avatar engine changes make them entirely obsolete. I need to cheer myself up. Interestingly, they get a lot of creature comforts. Taste support, cable TV. We see some controllers in Luke and Toby's rooms. It makes me wonder if that weighs like 50 pounds to them because they're instant matter. Maybe the controllers are instant matter too. Can you make a real CPU out of instant matter? Does Instatainment support its competition by letting the otherwise autonomous people they own purchase other products? This is what I meant when I called instant matter a wholly original and deeply interesting concept in my previous video. What a fucking concept! In so many words. It's a curiously applicable technology. An easy one is using avatars to make remote appearances, but think of the structural and artistic applications. Again, can you make a computer out of it? What a fix for the semiconductor shortages that are contributing to my goddamn Endwalker queue. I suppose at the end of the day, there doesn't seem to be much stopping avatars from running anywhere. There could be something about needing a projector nearby, but we never see anything like that. The teleporter on the cargo ship is implied to work at basically any range, and the designer can literally fly across the ocean where there is no reason for there to be any kind of projector coverage. When the cross-porting tech in the logs renders a lot of interstellar logistics problems irrelevant, if an avatar can run on this lunar island in some backwoods star system, why can't they run in the New York arcology? Maybe being an evotar isn't as bad as I thought. The entrapment should, by rights, be temporary. Kit. The quest, an unfortunate series of features, is the best quest in the game. Full stop. It was added post-launch in 1.1 along with the arena. Talk to this girl and go meet her on another account in the Maroon Desert and... oh. I guess you can't really have a mod stay client-side in physical space. Alright! I'm shook! It's only furries. My guard is down. I'm in a state of uncertainty, and anything can happen now. Crossworlds establishes such a visually consistent style in character designs, even separating itself from the greater style of CrossCode. So when suddenly this...
Oh my god.
glitched through some walls because, oh, okay, and suddenly we're in an unused area. Sergey is quite understandably horrified. This is the game designer in me talking, but wow, this is slapdash. Sergey says it was put together by some overambitious interns, and I very much believe him. The puzzles are jank, the objects are not behaving as they normally would, it's possible to trap yourself in a few places and need to redo stuff. There's a lack of shortcuts that open after you finish the section, and once you're actually done that puzzle... JADC... what? This is a glitch that is in the actual game. Jump off a ledge, attack, aim, or block very briefly in a very precise window, and you can dash in mid-air, elongating your jump. Name another game that tells you about a genuine glitch for a gag. But let's say you already knew about that. You see the gap and you think, I can make that jump. And you do. And Kit sees that you do. They changed the dialogue for when you exploit the game. So we're coming off the heels of all that when... what? I'm having a stroke! Time to gush about the final dungeon. There's not much here to talk about for narrative design, but there hasn't been for quite a while now. We have clearly diverged from our intended path. But I think that this is a perfect example of how you do a DLC expansion and a wonderful celebration of everything your game is good at. And I think that deserves to be discussed in a spoiler-safe environment. Azure Archipelago, cool. Jumping puzzle is clear. It's a funny escalation with none of the problems faced by the Maroon Desert or Gaia's Garden. The enemy designs are great.
A new worm!
But it's not what we're here for. Now, we're talking about the Culero Temple. The Culero Temple is my religion. Base game, this temple in Sapphire Ridge says it all. Crossworlds is in early access. It's a cute hint at the game's roots and a promise of future content. It was that way for years. So finally getting the DLC, they actually don't blow their load immediately. They show off the completed raid, the Azure Archipelago, the final Apollo duel to build some suspense, and they ensure that the pacing stays appropriate for players who start a new home immediately after finishing the base game. But once you get in, you already have every element. You probably maxed out your skills, so how do they shake it up? The Ancient Shade ups your max SP to 16. Enemies either make elements irrelevant or mandatory, no in between. Good way to spice it up. Open concept dungeon with other players running around most of it with you. Dungeon race with Emily expanded a bit. Seeing the cast play around and chat about the way things work, and Apollo and Endurance screwing themselves over by missing a button. This intro scene. I've seen videos of big patch days and MMO events. I've seen some of the self-organized memorials in Final Fantasy XIV with my own eyes, and oh my god, this level of hype is so real. The aesthetic of it is pretty fresh after every other dungeon. Obsidian crystals everywhere like some corrupted growth. Natural terrain speckled with puzzle buildings. It's pretty standout when everywhere else, track artifacts are very self-contained instead of this sprawling majesty. Puzzle mechanics previously only interacted with two elements tops. Bubbles only played with cold and heat. Collectors only played with shock and wave. This Pharaoh fluid does it all, plus stacking with bubbles, bombs, and collectors. And they react the same way that the other mechanics do. Wave acts like the teleporting pillars, shock acts like the magnets, heat makes it react like the bombs, and cold gives it gravity like the hockey pucks. And the Pharaoh fluid interacts with everything else I just mentioned. Knock it into a bubble, the water will stay forever, and you can knock the Pharaoh fluid around if you freeze it into a puck. Push it into a bomb, permanent bomb that goes off when you fire it. You can do both of these at once and are at points required to. The energy collectors will carry the Pharaoh fluid along with the orbs, and this continually fucks my brain. The sheer scale of the dungeon supports this majesty. You see some lore portraits, you see the majestic backgrounds behind you with focus that hasn't been given in prior dungeons. Seeing the ancients' constructions be something more than abstract cubes is definitely a plus. The Guardians are an interesting challenge. Big shields, off-kilter timing. Using the Pharaoh fluid to take down the barriers is intuitive and simple enough. Reusing these coils is a great sign of what the player needs to do. Jumping down 30 floors to reach the final door is delicious. It's a spicy suspense builder. And the final boss... You're fighting a quintet of Technicolor elemental bird gods on an extra-dimensional cyberspace plane, and they do not give you a second to breathe before they start whipping out black holes. Jubileus eat your heart out. Radical fish make you look like a radical bitch. Laugh! This works better as an omni-elemental final boss than the creator because A. It uses pre-established lore figures without trying to oversell their backstory with insufficient screen time. B. They're all congruent with element and class fantasies. Fire is fierce and unrelenting, ice is sweeping and brutal, wave is a clever, synchronized detonation, and shock needs to take its Ritalin, but you can't make me, Dad! C. It doesn't break its own pace by requiring constant shifts into puzzle mode, so it doesn't come across as the game handing you a damage multiplier that you, by rights, should not need. It keeps up its frantic pace without overlong charge animations, it keeps it spicy and telegraphed by unique silhouettes and color accents of the different gods, and you still get breathing room between them so they're not overlapping. D. The lesser gods die quick, no more than 2 breaks. If you're good, you can get it in 1. Their elemental affinities are firmly in the non-optional category, complete immunity to their own domain. You get a view of 2 at a time in the first few phases, then later you get all of them at once after you've recognized their patterns. E. Just look at this, it's dope as hell and you know it. Once you beat them, approach the Stargate, get a teaser for Cross Worlds, New Horizons. CrossCode 2, sadly, is not going to happen. Their newest project is called Project Terra, and it looks gorgeous already. If this turns into a shared universe, I will pee. Just a little. Like a man does. What a way to end the game. Oh, yeah, the finale with Sidwell's avatar is rushed and confusing. It honestly feels like a Kingdom Hearts reveal. And his boss fight is annoying because his sprite is small and darting around every second, so that's already tough to read. Emily is committing war crimes against my spatial awareness, and his attacks use a very different visual style which, while awesome, doesn't help me read the situation. Weirdly, his attack modulation does feel a lot more appropriate than the creator, because it's literally a modded bot script running on an avatar and Sergei's influence is more blatant. I'm very happy it was defense instead of HP. If quadrillions were showing up on screen in the middle of this, I think I'd have a panic attack. Crossworlds just has better finales than CrossCode, I guess. Sidwell. The way Sidwell is treated as the villain in this game is surreal. Not in the way of, what in Toby Fox's name were they thinking, or, whoa, society. I mean the dictionary sense of dreamlike and unreal. I've never seen a villain quite like him, and I don't know if I mean that in a good or bad way. Every other character has their own kind of tics and extremely well-defined voices. Emily slipping into French, Lucas's hyper-casual attitude, Apollo's flair for the dramatic, Buggy dunking on anyone and everyone around him at all hours, a man after my own heart. Sidwell is just not dull, not bland, just null. He's in a perfect position to be the magnificent bastard trope to a T. He's always in control. His plans are certainly complex enough to get away with some gloating now and again, but he just doesn't. The only time he shows any real emotion is when Gotham takes over to let Lee into the Vermilion Tower, but it's not really a show of emotion, it's just frustration. Gotham, come on, can you not? And for a game with this kind of combat flashiness and a Scooby Gang of a cast, you'd expect the villain to be a similarly larger-than-life figure with a Machiavellian scheme for world domination. Look at any Persona 5 Palace for an example, but his plan is oddly dull. Torture off-the-grid memory clones for personal data and credit card numbers, sell them off, do fraud, delete the loose ends. Purposefully dull and human villains are one thing. Yoshikage Kira is a famous example. His prime goals are to enjoy his favorite sandwiches and keep a half-decent job, but that's contrasted by his rotten hand collection. But Sidwell just doesn't have that element. I don't get it. And then once you get into the server room, he doesn't even put up a fight. He says a few words, then leaves. It was just very profitable, he says. I got mad at this ending for being a cop-out when I first played it, but his attitude has never left my head. Is he a metaphor for capitalism? Business is too big to fail? Big data? Given the meta-narrative around Gotham, he could be an example of a crummy publisher like EA parasitizing a product and its team for all it's worth in shady criminal manners, and then just bailing once the jig is up. His lines are interesting and his plans are fun to look around at, but he always has this uncanny air to me. He never seems invested in anything he talks about except for, well... Okay, this calls for another content warning. This features shades of abuse, Stockholm Syndrome, and pedophilia. A lot more serious than the last one. If these are triggers for you, the end of chapter timestamp will be on screen. Once Lee is made, he goes about teaching her things, caring for her, teaching her some ASL. It seems pleasant, but then he goes on walks alone with her in the Vermilion Wasteland, this prison, and he opens up to her about another woman implied to be a lost lover, mute like Lee. Read it listening and ugh. Am I the only one getting chills? 1, that is a hell of a statement to make about a mute person. I can't make assumptions because I am evidently not mute, basically the opposite. And I don't know any mute people, but doesn't an appreciation phrased this way show narcissism on Sidwell's part? Lee never communicates back to him to acknowledge her identity in any meaningful way, just sitting there and smiling and responding positively to the only person she's ever really known, and the only person to ever show her any kind of affection, however twisted. Compare that to how Sergei treats her. I mentioned that he asks her questions and makes an effort to give her opportunities to express herself. Sidwell does no such thing at any point. The closest is getting her to mimic him. Lee is infantilized in a lot of these scenes. There's no memories, no communication skills, no prior life experience, and while she presumably would have the capacity to understand why this is wrong, she has no frame of reference, so comparing her to a dead romantic interest, it's kind of fucked. And while we don't get any listed ages for characters, there's definitely an age gap here and certainly a power dynamic to be abused. Rich older men and attractive young women together almost never indicates a healthy relationship founded on trust and companionship. But even if we take her age to be Shizuka's rather than the time of her creation, I wager that Lee is only about college age, mid to late 20s. When Emily mentions school non-specifically, I'd wager that our main cast is early 20s at the oldest. So while I'm not saying that Sidwell is a pedophile, something about this don't sit well with me! God, he is a fascinating villain to watch play out just by virtue of his voice. I don't want to say that I love to hate him, but he's just such a detestable yet realistically scummy figure. If you have any takes on him, put them in the comments. I would love to hear some thoughts on that. And on the topic of engagement,
Today's video is sponsored by Dopamine. Hand it over.
we're out of the minefield. Time to talk about the base game's highest point, only maybe matched by the final dungeon from earlier, but this has much more concrete reasons for working. The Vermilion Wasteland. Yes, the entire chapter. From immediately after the raid to the introduction of Gaia's Garden. This is where the story stops being a charming adventure with dumbass NPCs and a riff track to an original plot. And just by looking at the place, you can tell it's quite a turn. This kind of atmosphere of tubes, beet red water, deep crimson on violet, the same room you've seen in your flashbacks. Oh, mwah, chef's kiss, 0 out of 10, get me out of here immediately. The new virus enemies, while there's certainly an argument for there being too many for too long, bouncing antithetical elements together is a great positioning challenge and makes a nice shake-up from other enemies. The quests you're given make a very chilling contrast. The big head of the Trackwalker initiative is out here giving you meaningless objectives to fulfill for XP and credit rewards with no meaningful story content compared to the colorful quests you're used to. The NPC dialogue you pass by is always rather quirky, but before now it's never been, now you take the fish and cook it up in the jelly for 2 hours. Add the sesame, season with pepper and oregano. What happens then? Add lemon juice, add the pineapple, stir fry for 20 minutes. Cover in breadcrumbs, fry another 30 minutes, wrap it in 2 layers of cheese, deep fry. No way! Add water and bring it to a boil for 2 hours or until soft. Mix it all up and throw it in the blender and let cool for an hour. That's how you make the jelly.
Now take the fish and cook it up in the jelly for 2 hours. Add the season with pepper and oregano.
What happens then? It puts the lotion on its skin! Why can't I die? Ow. But you have Lucas with you too, being kind and goofy and panicking when he can't log out and forcibly demonstrating the prison camp's charming security system. He pulls the weight otherwise taken by the entire cast with some nice character development with Lee to protect you from total whiplash until Shizuka. Oh, the Shizuka reveal. Remember the cold open? We all thought that Lee was just Shizuka but amnesiac. Apollo showed that Spheromancers have plenty of room for aesthetic variation. So their matching hairstyle, matching outfit, matching headband if not horns, Sergei's coma excuse, you dreaming of memories with figures similar to those seen in the cold open, literally everything points to Shizuka being comatose in the real world while they stick a nerve gear on her head to try and save her. So when she walks into your room, calls you a bitch, beats the shit out of you, and wrecks your little Zen garden, oh damn, yeah, Lee does a wonderful impression of my reaction. Quite understandably, Lee and Sergei now have serious tension between them. He's lying to her about who she is. Luke calms her down the next day, she gets to laugh at his slob room, and I can't help but think that these people look very different from their avatars. Maybe there's some bioscan like SAO did for better sync with your avatar, but some NPCs talk about purple chest hair, so
You're not a girl, and you're not 17.
Anyways, Lee refuses to speak to Sergei and logs out for the night. And tomorrow comes the tower. Sergei is silent. Lucas is a bit unsettled about the instance. There's a well-paced and tonally appropriate stealth section that complements your moveset very well. You get a few rooms in and... Lee, you need to know I have your best interests at heart. I know you won't believe me, so let me calibrate this program, and I'll fucking prove it. This is the moment that takes CrossCode from a 9 to a 10. Everything comes together. Instances have always been weird in this game if you think about it. How do you think instances could work in real-world space? They don't bring up the question, but here's your answer. Dystopian infinite Rubik's Cube. You are behind the scenes and making glory holes in the fourth wall. You've been wandering through an area that's a bit too big for comfort. A lot of dead space and backtracking with limited context. You have been trapped. No more. You are physically rejecting any state of imprisonment and moving too fast for your brain to catch up. It's reconciliation between Lee and Sergei with some of the most brazen abuse of his position he shows in the whole game. The all-important pace keeps a fever pitch with the simplicity of the puzzles and even skipping some entirely because we're genre-aware in a way that makes perfect logical sense. Drive by an early hint of the tower's purpose, and now the blue avatar is on your case. Get chased by his sentries like on the cargo ship, a situation the player can recall with added complexity and stakes. All of this accompanied by the game's musical highlight, Hack Your Way. Last video, I said some of these tracks were used in ways on par with Toby Fox. I meant it. This is perfect. It's an absolute bop to accompany your breakout, and I wish I knew enough about music to elaborate further, because it deserves it, and I feel weird about leaving it unanalyzed. Check it out on YouTube, it's pretty freaking good. Notably, somebody commented that they love the Mega Man Star Force vibes. I would call that accurate, but then he's hearted the comment, and he's evidently not the type to do that. Ichiki hit the nail on the head, and the fact that he did it on purpose, connecting this Pokemon Ranger style of sprite work to Mega Man Star Force, really shines a light on what makes this game resonant to me. That era is where my nostalgia hits. I am not accepting criticism at this time.
Capcom, please reboot this, I'll do anything!
And then comes the Gastropolis. Big Snail. The blue avatar drops this functionally impossible challenge before you. Sergei doesn't even know how to say its HP count. So, Sergei decides to give you an attack buff. One that multiplies exponentially. And this is why it works here, but not against the creator. This boss is an extant RPG trope. It could be something meant to be faced by multiple players at once, in small instances chipping away at it over time. Or it could be something along the lines of Final Fantasy XII Diazmath, 15's Adamantoise, 11's Absolute Virtue. Man, Final Fantasy is a big fan of that. Anyways, these examples exist for this creature to draw from. It's not being modified from something. The scaling attack doesn't go from working to not working to working again. It goes from not working to working, working more, working more, working more. I've seen a lot of discussions citing this as the designer giving Lee a technically surmountable challenge. No, he's not. In the same way that it's technically possible to climb the CN Tower with your bare hands. You could, probably. It would take a long time. Every step would need to be precision calculated down to the atom. With perfect weather conditions, specialized footwear, your fingers would be breathing from the necessary grip after 30 seconds, but realistically, no you can't, you're gonna fucking die. Evotars experience fatigue. Beyond the limitations, the first guild to actually take down Absolute Virtue in Final Fantasy XI allegedly vomited while fighting the Pandemonium Warden for 18 hours. Gastropolis is stated on the CrossCode wiki to have 1.6 times 10 to the power of 20 HP. Here's that number on screen. Your damage only becomes reasonable once Lee is hitting for quintillions, and that's a conservative estimate. This would take Lee actual years, if not decades. No, this is not possible. If for no other reason than being interrupted by server maintenance, or the fucking game shutting down. The creator himself proves that even when it's not Gotham's first resort, he can and will use full-on hacks and admin powers to handle business. And as the creator, he multiplies his HP knowing full well that Sergei can multiply Lee's attack in kind. It's patronizing. None of these problems are present in the Gastropolis. Sergei pulling the rabbit out of the hat is a surprise. You didn't know he could do it. It's pretty evident why he can't do it often. The musical score changes and escalates with your attack value. The boss spawning ads is something that would naturally do as a scripted boss. So it's got the surprise element, it's got the escalating music, it lampoons a real trope, it's well placed in the tension curve, the scene it punctuates doesn't feel like an interruption.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit?
The exponents don't undercut themselves by having your opponent match them. All I can think to add is whipped cream and a cherry on top. You finish your escape with Lucas, but he's frozen and stolen while all you can do is run. Captain Jet comes in like a bat out of hell with a rocket launcher, snatches you up, and away you go. And the fallout of the whole scene doesn't slack. Emily is freaked out by why Lee was out of contact for a week. Lee and Lucas have some very awkward moments. It lets Lee bond with Apollo and Jern while Emily is out of the picture until Citron helps them make up. It's so simple to describe, but it is so effective, running all these little character arcs in parallel. None overstay their welcome, and they're all neatly resolved. In summary, that is why I love CrossCode so much and why it gargles my piss every time I remember that there was no Game Awards nomination or broad appeal. Since I offered that spoiler warning at the beginning, every single one of you, without exception, has absolutely played through CrossCode. But even among this perfectly angelic audience called YouTube, that would never disrespect my desire for content to go unexperienced by those not informed enough to fully understand it, I recommend we all play through it again. Play with some new combat modifiers, play in ice physics the whole way through, spam ether snipe in every encounter, see what new secrets you can uncover. Calling buggy at certain plot points is good for a few special moments, and there's so many great side quests I didn't have time to touch on, and as a bonus, none of them are platform locked anymore. Hooray! Sadly, this game has kinda run its course. But, I mentioned, Radical Fish is making a whole new game. Currently known as Project Terra, all the devs have posted about it now and again on Twitter. It looks to play a lot like CrossCode, and it's great to see what they're doing with a proper game engine. So, show them some love on Twitter, spread the word. These guys are legendary and deserve every scrap of attention we can get for them.
And another one bites the dust. Yeah, this one came out really well, I'm proud of this. I've got my audio pipeline mostly figured out. The audio, you'll notice, is a lot more consistent this time. I've got some denser, cleaner edits because I've actually organized my files a bit more consistently. The only thing I would have changed is that I would have made CrossCode relevant on YouTube. But that shouldn't be an issue for my next script. I'll be talking about Pokemon. That is going to be a very interesting video to make, and hopefully a very interesting video to watch. So if you want to see it, like the video, subscribe, comment, boost me up in the algorithm, because it is a noticeable difference when that happens. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye!